Khilafah? Is this the right time to declare, the Islamic State? But, what I would say to you is that the images that are coming from the war, from the Islamic State itself, are not about children and women. They are about the people living peacefully, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, under the Islamic State, and under the Sharia. They have free food, clothing, and shelter. Their life, their honor, their wealth is protected. Even they can have their own churches and their synagogues. Yes, the shrines are being destroyed because we don't have shrines and idols in the public arena. On top of that, you can see images of the Christians coming back to Mosul. The Yazidis, many of them are embracing Islam.
We can also see the images of people being executed, soldiers, Syrian soldiers being executed en masse and put into mass graves. I mean, those images exist.
Remember, we're talking about people who are criminals. The soldiers of the Syrian regime committed horrendous crimes. Remember, the Nusayris in Syria are people who consider the Sunnis to be like animals. Even the children and women are animals. They slaughter them the way they slaughter a dog or a cat.
This is simply not true. I don't know if you had any chance to talk to these soldiers in the Syrian army. I had, and many of them are conscripts. They're like 18, 19-year-old boys. I mean, what do they know? I mean, they were just given commands to go to the battlefield. Don't you have any mercy for those very young males?
I know you don't like to hear. I know you don't like to hear the truth, but the reality is that the soldiers who are fighting on behalf of Bashar al-Assad and on behalf of the Nusayri regime, obviously in Syria, and the people who are fighting for Nouri al-Maliki. Remember, the Yazidis were supporting Nouri al-Maliki for the American occupation. So there are some among them, obviously, who committed many crimes. Now, I think that those people are being tried. And many of those, obviously, because of the crimes that they committed, obviously are facing capital punishment. But it's not a case of people just going into the village and just killing anyone, like the Americans and others have to believe.
They're being killed in
their
countries.
Please verify from the Muslims.
How can you, since people are being killed in their hundreds, and we saw some of those mass executions of the Syrian soldiers, how can you even establish that guilt? I mean, they're being killed in the field. There's no time for any sort of proceedings to take place.
Okay, well, let me ask you something. Okay, what do you think these Syrian soldiers have been doing for the last few years? How do you think the 200,000 people were slaughtered? Do you think they just died like natural causes, or do you think it was the Syrian soldiers who were committing the crimes?
Well, I think there is still a civil war going on in Syria,
exactly. No. You know very well it was the Syrian soldiers. So let's not pretend that the Syrian soldiers were sitting having coffee in the cafes.
Time in Syria, and I'm entitled to my point of view just as you are.
20 seconds. So they were committing crimes. They were committing crimes, weren't they? What exactly happened in the Nuremberg trials? How many people were executed from the Nazis, in the Second World War? We need to wake up and realize that people are committing crimes against Muslims, and definitely they need to be tried. So, don't look at just the images of someone being killed. Quite frankly, if someone was run over by a bus and we didn't know his name, we all as human beings say, oh, well,
when were they tried? They were executed in the field. When were they tried? How could you establish their fault, their guilt rather?
Bear with me one second. If you see an ordinary man, run over by a bus, and we don't know who he is, we will feel sorry for him. But if it was Ariel Sharon, for example, or if it was Barack Obama, I think the Muslims will be celebrating, quite frankly, because these people are criminals. So I think it depends on who it is. Now, you agree with me as Syrian soldiers, and by all accounts, I believe the people will probably be tried, and maybe they're facing capital punishment. It's not a case of just picking people randomly. In war, people kill each other. Let's face it. How many have the Russians killed from the Chechens? How many of the Chinese killed from the Yin Yang? Why is it that you always point the finger at the Muslims? We don't care.
I'm not pointing the finger of the Muslims. I think many of those Syrian soldiers also consider themselves Muslims. But anyway, let's switch gears a little bit here, because what I'm interested here is how this violence could be ended. And my question to you is, when we look at media accounts, it is true that many of the IS fighters are being described as barbaric. They've been called in Western media sadistic psychopaths, what have you. But I think that's very typical of the Western portrayal, to demonize their opponents. But what I'm asking you is whether there is any chance whatsoever of the United States and the Islamic State having some sort of talks, because, a couple of years ago, the talks with the Taliban were completely ruled out, but the United States changed its tune later on. Do you think something like that could happen in this case?
I believe that what we are seeing is the fulfillment of the prophecy of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet said that Allah showed me the east of the east and the west of the west, and the authority of my ummah was over the whole of it. So I believe that one day the Sharia will be implemented in Russia and in China and America. There is no, if you like, permanent treaty between the Islamic State and any nation which is implementing non-Islamic law. There could be a temporary ceasefire with those people who are not enemies to the Muslims, but definitely because of the aggression of the Americans and the British and others, there will never be a treaty with these people. I think eventually they will be conquered. And I can tell you another thing, that the history of the Islamic State, if you look at it before, in fact the Islamic State was destroyed at the hands of the French and the British with their own stooge Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in 1924. And Lord Curzon, the British Foreign Minister at that time, said that we have killed the strength of the Muslims, we destroyed it. Now we see the re-emergence of the Khilafah, and we can see a new world order. Finally, we have a state where the Muslims are implementing the Sharia, and where it is expanding once more, and inshallah, all the world will be governed by the Sharia. So I don't see that the Muslims will ever recognize the United Nations or NATO or America.
This is one of the fears that many people in Western countries have, but as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sharia is not something that could be forced upon a person. Sharia is something that can only be accepted by the person when he or she submits to Islam. So when you say that those people, those countries will be conquered, aren't you actually, misquoting the message of your own prophet?
No, I'm not at all. No, I think, you said correct you if you're wrong. You're wrong. The fact is, as a foreign policy of the Islamic State, they must remove the obstacles in the way of implementation of the Sharia. There is no personal forcing anyone to become Muslim. But definitely as far as the law and order is concerned, this will be forcefully implemented. The Sharia, the divine law, will be implemented, and the corruption and the oppression and the injustice of man-made law, wherever it is in the world, will be removed. So there is forceful implementation of the Sharia and abiding by the command of God as far as the public arena is concerned, socially, economically, judicially, in terms of ruling in the foreign policy. And if you look at the history of the Islamic State, all the way from China into the heart of Europe, the Jews and Christians were very happy. In Europe, it led to the Renaissance, 800 years of the Sharia in the heart of Europe. So this is not alien to Western civilization. Let us have a good look at our history and see the beauty of Islam. When people were, living in the Dark Ages, the Muslim civilization was at the forefront of material development, and this is because of our own Aqidah, our belief.
I think Muslim civilization certainly has its due place within the broader human civilization. This is not what we are talking about here, and nobody is actually trying to insult Islam, despite what you're trying to
I'm just giving you an insight about what the Sharia does when implemented on state level. We have already an example through our history, and we will see another example inshallah in the years to come.